Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this next edition of Earth Day Live. My name is Tracy Ritchie, and I am Director of Education for earthday.org. We are so excited to have you here joining us to listen to this distinguished, amazing panel of global experts talking about the topic of climate literacy, the interdisciplinary nature of environmental education, and acknowledging World Environmental Education Day today. So thank you so much for joining. I'm just going to do a brief introduction and then I will hand it over to Dr. Kwok for our moderating of our panel and get into the topics, because you're not here to listen to me today, you're here to listen to this amazing panel. But I just wanted to say thank you again for everyone of your tremendous support of our climate environmental literacy campaign that we are doing through earthday.org. We are now over 400 global signatories representing over 100 countries around the world and millions of people, from teacher unions to labor unions to faith institutions to school groups and youth-led activations. We are so grateful for your support. And this Earth Day Live edition today is really meant to just continue that discussion and show how beautifully and inherently interdisciplinary environmental education is. All the topics and disciplines and sectors that come together to make sure that our students are environmentally literate moving forward. And again, so excited for this panel to bring all the different perspectives of their work for a very long time and how they're supporting that mission. So again, check out our website to learn more about our climate literacy campaign. We'll be in the chat with different links and resources to support your learning and continued ventures in this campaign, and we're so excited to have you here today. So from there, I will turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Christina Kwok, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Kwok, and I am the Associate Director of the Monitoring and Evaluation of Climate Change Education Project and a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution. So I'm thrilled to be with you all today on World Environmental Education Day. This year is an important year thanks to the work of organizations like Earth Day Network and the mobilization of millions of youth and climate advocates around the world who have made it very clear that an education that does not prepare us to face the challenges wrought by climate change is an irrelevant education. What a moment to highlight the centrality of our human relationship with the natural world in this project we call education, as well as how far removed and how untethered we have become to it. So this year we may actually see the fruits of everyone's labor with major climate change education policy wins, fingers crossed. And in particular, I think we'll see environmental education stakeholders who have been trying to get climate stakeholders and education stakeholders to pay any attention at all to the role of education in climate action, begin to shift their energy and efforts to directing the attention of stakeholders to the kind of education we need to change the world. And our panel today will focus on two core components of that education: environmental literacy and civics. So I don't want to take up any more time with my preamble here, as we have 5 spectacular speakers joining us today to help us unpack further the important role that environmental literacy and civic engagement play in education for climate action. And so I'll give each of the panelists an opportunity to tell us a little bit more about themselves, but I'll quickly introduce them to you so that you know who all is on your screen right now. To my bottom, we have Miriam Vilela, the Executive Director of the Earth Charter in Costa Rica. We have Dr. Larry Pasca, the Executive Director of the National Council for the Social Studies. We also have Elizabeth Wathuchi, the founder of Green Generation in Kenya. Michelle Lipkin, who is the Executive Director of the National Association National Association for Media Literacy Education. And last but not least, we have Dr. Pramod Sharma, the Senior Director of Education at the Foundation for Environmental Education. So to get our discussion going, I wanted to start first with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you are the founder of the organization Green Generation in Kenya. And we'd love to think that you created it because of your love and connection to the environment. But it seems like there's probably a deeper story there about you recognizing something that others did not, maybe others did not share the same sentiments as you, or that they were not given the opportunity to do so. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about the gap that you saw. What was the education that youth and yourself in Kenya were looking for? What were you getting? And why and how are you working to change that with the Green Generation Initiative?
Thank you so much, Dr. Christina. It's a great honor to be in this panel today. So my name is Elizabeth Wathuchi, the founder of Green Generation Initiative in Kenya. And for me, my connection to nature at a young age is what made me love nature and also have this natural call to action to want to do something about the environmental challenges that I identified with. And of course, having grown up in the most forested region in Kenya and in the Central Highlands in Kenya, there was always that connection with the natural environment, that connection of seeing the trees ahead of me, the bushes besides me, and being able to even sit close to a stream, watching the clean streams flowing. And all of these things as a child made me really have this strong love and connection to the natural world. And I remember wanting to understand more about what was happening to the environment. And so I'd read books and watch documentaries. And in the process, I realized that indeed there was much more to what I was seeing close to my homestead, that the wild forests were being destroyed and being burned down at alarming rates. And there were places around the world where people were being forced to even put on pollution masks for like children to go to school, and even seeing how our waterways were becoming what I like to call a soup of poison, flowing with plastic waste. And of course, these are the things that made me feel angered. And I always say that this anger did not stop at the anger. It gave me a hunger to want to do something about these challenges that I was seeing as a child. And for me, this really explains to you why I even founded this initiative. It was to create a generation of people who are conscious about the environment when they are still young. Because for me, the reason why I say I am on the forefront in conservation is because nature has been a part of me ever since I was young. And I understand from nature, I listen to nature, spend time with nature. And in the process, that is how we also get to feel the pain of nature caused by environmental degradation. So I strongly believe in beginning from down there. When someone is still young, we need to train them about the environment. We need to empower them more to understand what is happening around them. Because a lot of times we react a lot to the challenges we are seeing around us, but then it stops at the reaction. We are not proactive. We don't move beyond the anger. We need to have that hunger to now want to do something. We need to train the children and the young people to be the solution providers. And that is why this initiative focuses on practical environmental education for the children. And I always highlight that I planted my first tree when I was only 7 years old. And that is why one of the initiatives I started with this Green Generation Initiative is to ensure that every child gets a chance to plant and adopt a tree each in their school compound. And it was through a campaign that I dubbed Adopt a Tree campaign. And so for me, planting this tree and being able to watch it grow is something that really connects you directly. It's a spiritual, it's a connection that you really get to feel between you and the environment. And as a child, of course, you grow up understanding what really nature is all about. And that is why I thought environmental education should go beyond the theory bit of it. We should make sure that it's really practical, and the young people and the children can really get to understand it from the basics bit of it. So I remember at some point in time, I took some children to a stream around the city, Nairobi, just for them to be able to see what was happening, for them to be able to see a stream that has a different color from what they study in class. They know that water should be colorless, but then this stream is brown and it's having some bad smell. But there's a question that one little child asked me, who did this? And they did not stop at that. I explained. And the next question they asked me is, but what can we do about it? So it tells you that the young children are willing to be on the forefront. They're willing to be part of the solution. And it's just a step that is remaining for us to educate them, to empower them, and to make them feel that indeed they can be part of the solution, because these challenges are affecting us all and we cannot leave anyone behind. And of course, we always say that no one is too small or too young to make a difference. So we need to make sure that environmental education is holistic and is in a way that the children can connect directly beyond the theory bit of it that is taught. And that is how the initiative runs. And I believe that if we also take up this approach in different nations, in different organizations, then we can be able to inspire and impact more and more young people to step up and be the change that they want to see, and step up and create that livable world and a safe future that we are saying that we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's so powerful just to hear how your own journey has taken you to this place and to this initiative that you've started. Dr. Miriam, some of what Elizabeth described reminds me of your work at the Earth Charter. instilling these principles of sustainability and environmental consciousness or environmental literacy sounds like the core of your work at the Earth Charter's Education Center. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about the disconnect between the education we have and the education we need, both for people and planet, and what your approach has been to fill this gap.
Thank you so much, Christine, and for the invitation to join you here today. As I was listening to Elizabeth and the context and her passion, what came to my mind is that the majority of children that are living in urban areas nowadays do not have the opportunity to have a connection with nature, at least not as much as we used to in the past, or not as much as depending on where we live. So what comes to my mind is how can we instill and cultivate this connection, this human nature connection, only through books and only through a theoretical perspective? It's actually very hard. I think our worldviews are shaped by what we see. Our worldviews are shaped by what we experience. And the reality is that young children and young adults are not really going through an experience that can really instill in them a natural passion for nature, or even this clear connection that we humans have with nature. What I see is happening more and more is that the majority of the world citizens that are growing in urban areas are growing with this worldview of disconnection between here is humans, there is nature, and okay, we like nature, but nature is there, and not really seeing that we are also nature. And we have air, we have water. I mean, the food we need comes from nature, and whenever there is an opportunity to talk about caring for the environment, what they receive is still this information that there are the trees and they're important and we need to take care of them. And that has, of course, generated a lot of concern in me, and especially because I have been involved with UN policies on sustainable development for many years during the decade of the 90s. And I see that there are so many good UN policies being generated over the past 20 or 30 years. But there is a huge gap between policies and new understanding and what really is happening in the classrooms. And we need to address that gap because the reality is that there is no way we can change the direction of our civilization if we do not address the role of education. And it's not just any kind of education, it's actually a different kind of education. It's not just more education, but it's a different approach to education that helps us see things through a new lenses, that helps us to amplify our worldviews. And what the image that I have in my mind is people well educated going and walking around the world and making a lot of decisions, but who are totally illiterate in terms of ecological systems and totally illiterate in terms of ethics and values. And therefore, it's kind of blind people walking, making a lot of decisions with a lot of certificates, PhDs and MBAs, but illiterate. And that's very worrisome. And I'm saying this because in our mind, when we talk about environment education and sustainability education, it always sits on a box, on a specific place for those who want to learn about this, for those who want to be experts in this. But the reality is that we actually need to bring that knowledge into those who are being trained to become lawyers, to become business people, to become engineers. So it's not like environment education is there and training for engineers is somewhere else. So I have been, of course, very concerned with the intersection between sustainability, values, and education from the point of view that this new sensitivity towards who we are, what do we need as humans to be alive and for our own well-being as humans. It's so connected with nature, and it does not need to be this information and this training we cannot afford this to be just laying in the hands of environment education experts. We need to basically break the walls of that and incorporate environment literacy and ethics and values across training and across levels of education, not only primary, secondary, and higher level of education. So our work with the Earthshot International and the Earthshot Center on Education for Sustainable Development that we run here has been specifically focusing in training young people to become young leaders that have a sensitivity to this worldview that is articulated in their charter that has to do with our interconnections and our connection with the large living world. A vision that has to do with clarifying our duties and responsibilities with the well-being of all. And again, with this understanding that our society requires a new kind of education, a new look of education that engages people in thinking about who they are, our interconnection with the large living world, and what are the values that drive our decisions. So our work has been focused on training young leaders and also enhancing and empowering the capacity of educators to incorporate this kind of systemic vision of the world into education independently of the subject that is being addressed. And we do that through online courses with young people, but also with educators on education for sustainability through the lenses of the Earth Charter. But I think what drives our or urge our wish to do more of this work is the urgency that requires to shift or reorient education towards a new kind of education, an education that can cultivate the human sensibility, the human responsibility with the well-being of the large living world, not only with the well-being of human beings, or not only with the well-being of human beings within my community or my country, but expanding our vision as planetary citizens, but also that are responsible and who are caring for the well-being of people on the other side of the world, but also our relationship with the large living world. So that's what I think it's occupying most of our work nowadays.
Thank you so much. I mean, I can't help but reflect on how our current COVID pandemic and the increasing frequency of weather-related or climate-related disasters just certainly reinforces the need for education to instill in learners a sense that our human health, our societal health is intricately tied with our planetary health, right? And I think you really hit that on the spot. And so when we think about what, thinking back to Elizabeth's comments as well, youth want to understand climate change and they want the knowledge and skills to be able to evaluate their communities' climate risks and vulnerabilities, and the knowledge and skills to be able to then act upon what they learn in ways that make their communities and society better and stronger and more climate resilient. So this brings our discussion to civics as sort of a core part of Earth Day Network's climate literacy campaign. And I think we want to ask these questions of, what is civic engagement, and why are we talking about civics education together with climate literacy? So maybe Larry, if you could help us bridge this connection for us. You're the executive director of the National Council for the Social Sciences, an organization that we don't typically associate with climate change education. So tell us a little bit about how is civics connected with climate literacy, and what kinds of frameworks exist out there within your disciplinary orientation that can help our audience understand why we need to associate organizations like yours with climate literacy.
So thank you very much. Again, happy World Environmental Education Day to everybody. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you and especially to our attendees today to be able to share some thoughts and perspectives about civics and social studies education. So I guess we begin first with this idea of what questions are kids really asking every day, right? And so if we ask a child at home, ask a student in your classroom, ask kids that may be in your community, what's something that's burning in your mind? What's an issue that you're concerned about? Chances are it's a question that does relate to the human world. Chances are it's a question about how do I get along with my neighbors? Why is it important that I vote? Does it matter where I live? These are all social studies questions. These are questions that require a deep understanding of who we are, what the human-made world is all about, but especially why we feel civic engagement is so important to today's discussion is because the human world and the physical world are interconnected. So in social studies, we study the human-made world. We're interested in where people live, how they live, why they live, what their histories are like, what their dreams and aspirations are about, how they organize around leadership. But the physical world is where we live. And we interact with our environment constantly. And so civic engagement isn't just about how we relate to each other. It is about how we relate to the human world, to the physical world around us. So in social studies, we start with this premise that everything really begins with a question, right? It begins with the questions our kids ask. It begins with the questions we as educators pose in our classrooms. And from there springs inquiry. And so at NCSS, our organization has committed to focusing on lifelong inquiry and informed civic action as really the tenets of social education. And so we actually have a framework that we've been using over the past few years, and I'll share it in the chat box as well later and encourage you to use it. It's a framework to guide the development of standards, but honestly, I think it's a framework for instruction. It's really a framework for you to think about how you orient kids around the questions they care about when we're talking about climate and the environment. And so we call it the C3 framework. It stands for college, career, and civic life, because our mission is to prepare all students for college, career, and civic life, active civic engagement. So we start with the question. Now, I was playing around with this morning. I was trying to think, what's a question I would ask? Well, maybe at the elementary school level, I might ask, can we change the climate for the better? So a question we might ask as a younger learner is, I hear a lot about climate change. I'm not really sure what that phrase means, but if something can change, can I make it better? Maybe at a middle school level, or by the time we're getting into high school, we may be asking more specific questions about an aspect of climate change, like how can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or how can we ensure less pollution in the environment, or how do we push for laws and regulations that support public health and safety? So maybe we get more specific as we move on in school, but we can ask different questions about the environment at any age. And the first step is to ask the question and then plan, how would I go about answering it? Our second step is to use different tools from different disciplines. So I'm going to go with my question for a moment about how do we change climate for the better? Well, that is a civic question, because ultimately it depends maybe on partnership with us, different organizations that are here today working together, different individuals in a community standing up and working together. Maybe it also involves economics, though, because maybe it's a money issue. So maybe part of it is, what resources do we have available? Do we have to balance needs and wants to be able to focus our energies on making something better? What do we take away to add somewhere else? Maybe it's geography that answers this question. Maybe we need to study maps and geographic systems. Maybe we need to understand where people are living, or where the climate change issues that we're facing are really concentrated more, or more people are focused on them. Maybe it's a historical problem. Do we have to look back at how historians have viewed environmental change, environmental activism over time, what that's looked like? Maybe it draws on other disciplines like sociology, psychology, anthropology, archaeology. I don't want to leave out any of the social studies, but it could be one or more of these disciplines that help answers that question. Third step is, let's evaluate sources and look at evidence. What are different primary and secondary sources we can use, especially as we solve this as more of a global question? So perhaps we're interacting with students in other countries. Are we looking at primary sources and evidence from that kids are working with in other classrooms? So if I'm in France, for example, or I'm in China, how are students in classrooms in France or China answering the same question? What sources and materials are they using? Our last step is really the most profound. And Elizabeth, when you started this morning and you were talking about some early actions you took, it reminded me about this importance of informed action. This is the last part and the heart of what we consider our C3 framework. It's not just writing a term paper about climate change and having it get an A and go in your folder. It's about communicating the conclusions you're drawing from the evidence and planning how you would take action based on those conclusions. So I look at this as there are lots of ways we can communicate our answer to, can we change the climate for the better? We can record podcasts, we can write editorials, we can write a play, we can talk with officials in our school, we can invite community leaders into our school, we can decide to start a 501c3 of our own. These are all examples of informed action and how we communicate conclusions. And we want to encourage that social studies doesn't stop at just the term paper, but social studies really comes alive when kids are able to apply their answer in a real world context. And so when we talk about taking informed action, we're saying we're understanding the problem, we're assessing options for action, and then we are applying and taking that action. So I was playing with this morning a little bit because I was fascinated with how would I go about teaching, can we change climate for the better? So understanding the problem, can we brainstorm a list of the challenges and issues in the current discussion of climate change at a age appropriate level, or perhaps using resources in our community that are easy to access? When we're assessing our options, what are the different challenges and issues we want to focus on? Some kids may want to focus on issues of water. Others may want to focus on the air. Others may want to focus on population density. Others may want to focus on pollution. But it's assessing where their interests are lying and plotting what are the different challenges and ways that you would go about solving. How would these issues how would they affect our quality of life, the economy, travel, long-term sustainability? And applying and taking action might be just as I described. You're publishing, you're writing in a public space. You're inviting people to talk with you or to meet with them, or you're going to other organizations or museums or sites and getting a firsthand look at the issue itself. To us, this is about empowering kids to be active in their civic engagement, about taking ownership of problems that are universal, that are common worldwide, and having kids not only take ownership, but then be able to share out conclusions with each other. And I'll lastly leave you with the issue that we face, that a lot of times we know that it's hard to talk about issues, or sometimes issues in classes can be seen as controversial. And the topic that we're talking about there, again, what makes it so really fundamental to social studies education is that it's drawing upon each of these disciplines together. So when we're asking questions about climate and environment, we are asking questions about our history, our shared values, our shared understandings, our geography, our economics. And so as educators, I would suggest to you, if a question seems to have more than one discipline as part of its answer, it's probably a great social studies question. And to students, the very questions you're asking about the world around you, those are social studies questions. And that's why to us, civic engagement, civic literacy is really at the heart of what we're describing here today.
Thank you so much, Larry. That is such a good way to show us that climate change education is interdisciplinary work. It's not just the responsibility of the science teachers in your school. And at the same time, this also means that we are able to open the Pandora's box when it comes to how we think about what goes inside the kind of education we need for climate action. And so I really resonated with your thoughts there. So maybe I'll turn over to Michelle. Your organization, the National Association for Media Literacy Education, I said it that time, has worked to make media literacy highly valued and widely practiced as an essential life skill. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the importance of media literacy and the skills that it entails when it comes to analyzing and evaluating and creating and taking action for climate?
Absolutely.
Yeah, should media literacy, go into this Pandora's box?
Yes, and I'm so glad. I always am. It's always a pleasure to follow Larry because we have a lot of parallels and we partner quite a bit with NCSS. So, and thank you for allowing me to be here. In my initial conversations with Tracy recently about the work of earthday.org and the work of NAMELY, which is the summary or the acronym, and I should have given that to you because it's a lot easier to say than the whole name. So NAMELY, the intersection between environmental literacy and media literacy is kind of extraordinary. And in our conversations, you could just kind of replace environmental with media and, keep going in terms of kind of the multidisciplinary nature of it. Media literacy is skill building, and it should be done across discipline. It's not something that can just live in an elective class. It really needs to be integrated within our education system. And I think that the parallels between environmental literacy and media literacy are so important because there is so much that we should be doing across our classrooms every day in both areas. And I think one of the things that was said at the beginning was this idea of education, we need to change the world. And I love that phrase because we spend a lot of time thinking about a lot of the questions that you've already brought up. How do I know what I know? And when you think about that, you can't ignore media, the media systems, the media messages that are coming at us every day. And I think that is a really important thing to talk about when you're talking about climate crisis, when you're talking about environmental literacy. Who is telling the stories in the media about these issues? What stories are being told about these issues? And more importantly, what isn't being talked about? What isn't getting attention that it needs? And we spend an incredible amount of time on things that aren't climate crisis. And that is shocking, right? Like, how is this not the top news story? And how can we ensure that our news coverage and the amount of attention that the media can give the environment is prioritized, right? So asking students to think about those questions and to think about, why don't we hear about this on the nightly news? Why are we not paying more attention to this? And what are the beliefs that you have about the climate crisis and the environment that comes from the news, comes from advertising, comes from disinformation about the climate? You can take all the media literacy skill building that we teach and teachers are teaching every single day, and you can frame that within the context of environmental literacy, and looking at the real world implications of the lack of media coverage of these issues, right? So I think what's really important, though, is even in the framing, the way we define media literacy, it's the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. And I keep hearing that already today, is that the action really matters and that civic engagement really matters. And so I'm thinking a lot about, how do we bridge environmental literacy and media literacy? How do we examine the role media messages are playing in how we understand climate crisis? What are the skills that students need to succeed in the world, but also eventually lead the world? And I want to just say one last thing about just kind of an emerging field or emerging area within the media literacy space, and that's eco-media literacy. And there's some really extraordinary scholarship that's being done, specifically Antonio Lopez and Jeff Scher are looking at these concepts of eco-media, not only the footprint, but also the mind print, right? So what is the impact technology is having literally on the environment? Like, what is, when you look at the way technology is made and the resources used, what is that footprint, right? We don't ever talk about that, right? But then we also have to think about the impact on our minds and on our values and our beliefs. So there's kind of two ways to look at the connection between media and the environment. And we really need to be doing both in order to fully understand this space. So I'm going to stop because I feel like I'm going to learn so much, and I want everyone else to do more talking.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I mean, I love how you framed how you could really just interchange these two concepts, environmental literacy and media literacy, because they're so intertwined, right? In order for us to better understand how our environment shapes our lives, how we shape our environment, these are all also communicated in our day-to-day, and it's so important to bring that in. So I want to go to Pramod now from your perspective, what have you seen globally around the world through your work at FE, the Foundation for Environmental Education? Is this an emerging trend in the approach to environmental education, or is this something that would need to be socialized and institutionalized as a way to empower students to not only be climate literate, but also to be leaders for sustainability and climate action?
Thank you, Christina. So basically at Foundation, I think we have acknowledged this aspect that both knowledge and the action has to be part of important component of literacy. And if you look at the TBC definition in 1977, one of the principles is of participation, and that was incorporated from the beginning, and which was acknowledged as part of civic action. Yes, the definition of civic action changes and it goes down based on the politics of the era or of the time kind of thing. But when we look at the program that we offer at the Foundation for Environmental Education, we look at both the aspects of basically engaging the child in with the issues and with the principle of being solution oriented or being a problem solver, and then helping the child engage and then use his or her agency to connect with families and also with the communities within the school and outside the school. And the important element, all our programs start with formation of an eco committee, because that's what we consider as an important element or training that a child needs to have, whether as a normal person or as a leader, whatever you may call it. But that important element of being able to negotiate changes that they want, prioritize changes that or urgencies that are there, understand what kind of trade-offs are there when you are working with so many interests that are there in our society of different stakeholders, and understand environmental or climate issues as a very complex issue without any simple answer where you can just say that this is the action that is possible and we can all do it kind of situation. The other thing that we have always looked at is that we realize that only one program within the school system or a formal education system will not suffice or will not be enough kind of thing. So when we approach schools, we approach with a basket of 3 programs. The Eco School program uses a transformative pedagogy of engaging the child with the problem, and then there is a step which is important, which requires participation and networking with the stakeholders. And based on that only they will get a green flag as a label or a sign of achievement. But the second program, which is called Young Reporters for Environment, engages them with media tools and is based on thought leadership, is that there are other roles that you play within the civic system or the society that you live in. And you also are an influencer, and training them to be influencer of the change that is required in the society. And the third program, which is called Learning About Forest, basically encourages them to spend time outdoors in nature, and basically looking at those spaces as important spaces for society. And if they don't realize that and don't acknowledge that, it's difficult for them to get into its protection. As Miriam also said, that then the disconnect happens. You don't associate, and you only associate with those spaces for your vacation or once or twice in a year, and rest of the time you're spending with all the consumption that you would like to enjoy in life. And for detox, you go there for 1 day or 2 days or at the most 1 week kind of thing, and you say that nature has to be preserved for those 2-3 days, and rest of the time I can consume and I can be part of the modern society, as we call, or the rat race associated with it. So it's a complex thing, and the important realization that I have got personally with my work and the work that has been done in the last 26 years at the foundation is that the experience is the most important tool that we need to provide to the young people. And one of the questions was that when we should do it. It's a lifelong thing. You start with the family when the child is born, and it will go because the nature of the problem changes very few years. Nature of the society changes, and the values and culture changes, and there needs to be continuous learning and continuous engagement and continuous problem solving. And so there is no right time or wrong time for education or that experience. It always needs to happen, and we need to see that how do we provide them education as when they are students, but when also they are consumers. And two of the labels that we work with provide that as consumers in the tourism industry. For example, the Green Key or Blue Flag, those two programs engages adult for sustainable consumption kind of situation. And so I don't associate literacy or civic engagement as two different areas. They need to go together and on every platform and every step, and that is experiential. You cannot teach that kind of thing. You have to provide that experience to the person that you are working with.
Thank you so much, Pramod. So I want to take some of those threads because I think essentially what you're saying and what all of our speakers here are saying today is that there is a repositioning of students essentially in our conceptualization of education. You know, it repositions them in the learning process and beyond that. The idea of the civic action is that there's application beyond the four walls of the classroom. And you know, that whatever they're learning has ripple effects beyond themselves in the present moment. So I want to go back to Elizabeth, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you think your work connecting youth with this sort of practical environmental education, you know, greening schools, establishing food forests, planting trees, how does it teach youth to be civically engaged throughout their lives? I mean, what are you seeing with your green generation in terms of how youth, after, you know, you've engaged them, continue to, engage in civic action?
Thank you so much, Christina. I think one of the things to highlight is that we've always seen young people being seen more for the challenges they're facing rather than being seen for them being solution providers. So these kind of activities shape the young people to start seeing themselves as solution providers. And also because I believe that young people are the ones who still remain to be at the center of the challenges we are talking about, like the climate crisis. I've seen many hopes being dashed where children and young people have to suffer and face the consequences of the climate crisis. They don't get access to go to schools. They don't get enough food for them to eat because of the food crisis. And all of these challenges put the young people and the children at the center of it all. And of course, we need to begin going beyond seeing them for these challenges, because the same young people who are at the center of these challenges and the same young people who will live longer with the consequences of the world's inaction today are the same young people who are stepping up for climate action, are the same young people who are stepping up with different solutions in their communities to try and make sure that these challenges and these impacts will not escalate. And the reason why these young people are doing this, of course, is because they want a safe future. They want a livable world, because we are saying that they will live longer with the consequences. So nobody wants to live longer with the consequences of the world inaction. So if we don't see action happening, then young people need to be empowered that we can also step up. And that is what is happening around the world. A lot of young people are really stepping up and taking up action. And I think I've also seen the same, for example, with Green Generation Initiative. I have seen the same young people that we are training today lighting up others, lighting up their communities, lighting up their parents, and they get some communication or they get some message, and then they don't stop at that point in time. They take it out to the rest of their colleagues, they take it out to their parents, and they take it out to their communities. We also see the same young people starting up initiatives in their regions. And I would say, like, for now, with the initiative, we've been able to reach out to over 20,000 school children. And this impact, we are looking at the young children that we have reached in different schools, and the ones who have also continued to carry on the initiative in their different communities, because they want to see the same thing happening around. And I think one of the ways in which young people also get inspired and get empowered and motivated to do more is when they also see different actions, like I've mentioned, is when they see different initiatives taking place, because then they will begin to believe that they can't start from anywhere, and it doesn't have to take very big and huge steps for us to be the solution providers. I always say, do what you can. And that's exactly what we are trying to pass to these young children. They don't have to do huge steps, because every small act that they're going to do today, multiplied by millions of us young people and other children, is what is going to eventually add up and make that difference. And because the late Professor Wangari Maathai is always my inspiration, I think I like to reiterate her words, where she always espoused on the power of one person, that each one of us can make a difference, but collectively we are a force. And that exactly is what we are trying to emphasize with empowering more of these young people, because when we reach out to them, empower them, and make sure that they understand that the challenges that the world is facing, and they understand that they can be part of the solution in holding their leaders accountable, and at the same time also making sure that they are taking small little actions within themselves to make a difference, then by that we'll be changing the world one step at a time.
Thank you. Miriam, I want to ask you if you're optimistic that such repositioning of students in the learning process, as Elizabeth was just talking about, can that be applied in mainstream schools, or will it be the domain of non-formal education institutions?
Good question. I think we should envision both. We cannot afford to see formal education, formal schooling from primary, secondary school, or higher education. We cannot afford to let it continue to be detached from the current civilization crisis that we have. The formal schooling system needs to embrace it and adapt and incorporate it at the core of what they do. So we have to really think of the purpose of education in the formal schooling system. But it's true that non-formal education settings go much faster, change much faster, adapt much faster, and probably reach more. And I would dare to say that informal education settings is actually what is shaping most of our world vision. Everything that we receive from internet, from the movies, from the advertisements, these are all non-formal education that's going on anyway. And I think the majority of people are absorbing a non-sustainable worldview in a totally ecological, illiterate worldview is what's being absorbed from the non-formal or informal education settings, right? All the information that we receive from everywhere that actually helps to shape our worldview. So I'm optimistic in the sense that I think the United Nations, UNESCO, has a very strong new policy on education, Education 2030, that stresses the importance of climate education, global citizenship education, education for sustainable development, and emphasize and highlight the importance of that education in formal schooling. So I'm optimistic from the point of view that there is a lot of push or policies that are articulating the importance of that. They're elevating the importance of a new approach to education that is not just about content, but also a new approach of education that is looking at transformative learning, like education that is more meaningful, that's more adjusted to the context of the learner. So I'm optimistic because I see that in the policies, and I see more and more educators willing to learn more about that, despite the fact that the system may be still stiff. I think there is a lot of room to maneuver and work inside there. But again, reiterate what I said, I think non-formal education has a lot of room to do. So most of the work that we do at our education center that is based in Costa Rica functions around non-formal education. So, but we think that it's the way for us to reach our mission, no? The Earth Charter International is really looking at ways to deepen and amplify our consciousness with regards to how we are interdependent to nature and to the large living world, amplify and deepen our consciousness with regards to how we ought to relate to other human beings and nature in general. So, for instance, I am optimistic because I see that, at least from the experience we have in the course we have specifically for young leaders, we have a 10-week online course program on leadership, sustainability, and ethics that it has been engaging young leaders from different regions of the world. And I'm saying that I'm optimistic because I see these young leaders, meaning people from 18 to 30 years old, who, independently of their context, independently of what they're studying, they are fully engaged in trying to learn how to contribute to their local community in a way that they can reorient or change the direction of their local community. And this course, it's not really framed inside any university, although we have been collaborating with a number of universities that have embraced this 10-week online course on leadership, sustainability, and ethics for young leaders as part of their formal education system. But this is fully offered in a non-formal education setting. So I'm optimistic because I see that at the end of this 10-week course, these young people are fully engaged and continue to find ways to contribute with the local community and engage others. And this is not because they're about to get a university degree thanks to that. It's really, it's kind of in their nature, the willingness to contribute to the betterment of their society. And they're just looking at opportunities to be trained and to be part of a global network. And that's what we have been offering. So I'm saying this because I have seen from the experience we have that either from the formal education system and non-formal education, there is a lot of opportunities being offered. And I do think that we are changing the direction. For instance, we also offer an online diploma program on education for sustainable development that's focused on educators. And again, these are educators that are interested in rethinking their role as educators, independently on whether the system is allowing them or whether the system is asking them to do so. I think it comes from the understanding that any educator has a lot of room as part of their job to incorporate these ideas into classes of mathematics, history, social studies, language. And what we do is basically we show that the importance, well, we generate a dialogue for them to see the importance to create spaces to examine our values. What is really driving our decisions? What ought to drive our decisions if we are to contribute to the betterment of our societies? With simple examples as inviting children through a language class to look at what they're eating for breakfast, for lunch, or dinner, what they want to buy, what's the environment, social, and economic impact of everything we consume every day, and just to cultivate that kind of reflection that leads to examine our values and worldview. Why do I think the way I think? Why do I want to buy or eat whatever I'm buying or eating every day? And what's the consequence and the impact of my decisions every day as an individual? So anyway, I see that there's a lot of room for all of this to happen, both in the realm of formal education and in non-formal education.
Thank you. I think you had a really great segue to a conversation about educators and teachers, but I also want to be mindful of our time. Tracy, do I have time to go into one more set of questions?
Yeah, I think we have a few minutes. We do have a ton from the chat that I think we can review, but I think we could do one more set and then we'll take a few from the audience.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because Miriam, you've raised sort of one of the crux of the issues that I have in my head, and that's, the risk of, advancing an agenda around environmental education that, you know, risks getting institutionalized but not fully implemented. We have studies that show, you know, a huge desire by teachers to teach climate change education, or, you know, a huge proportion, or not huge, but, you know, a large proportion of schools being deemed an eco school, for example, but, you know, a very small percentage of teachers actually teaching climate change education in their classrooms. So because they're, you know, they're saying they don't have the expertise, or they don't have the knowledge, or they don't have the resources, you know, what are we really trying to do when we're thinking about the teachers? So I want to throw this to Larry or Pramod, if you have some thoughts on this, and I have a question for Michelle as well, but if we have time, go ahead, Larry.
Okay, I'll say very briefly, it really starts with the foundation in all disciplines right at the earliest levels, right? Early childhood education, when our kids are in preschool programs, they have a foundation in social education, science education. There are studies that are showing the impact of reading comprehension on content knowledge. I'll give you a very, very quick example. This summer, I live in the East Coast in the Washington, D.C. area. There were significant wildfires happening on the West Coast. There was one night in particular where a lot of smoke from those fires actually was visible in our air 3,000 miles away. Sitting outside grilling, so producing smoke, having our children outside ask a question about what is all that in the air, and getting into a discussion with early elementary age kids about how an event 3,000 miles away is impacting the climate where we are now, but then the larger questions of, so what do we do about that? So to Miriam's point earlier about the informal and the formal education, I guarantee you we were not the only family that night answering questions from kids about what's going on in the sky, why is that happening, and what do you mean 3,000 miles away? I'm trying to process that number and what that means. That's the opportunity now to dig in, content knowledge, the importance of air quality, of travel, of geography, of understanding where people are settling, understanding some of the political questions that are being asked about how we take care of people and the costs of taking care of our environment. Again, it's any age, but it really starts with our students are asking these questions. These are interdisciplinary answers that are required to solve them. But it does begin at the very earliest levels with a grounding in content knowledge, making sure that when we're reading and we're using different texts, when we're using media in all its forms, that we are engaging in the content of these disciplines together. Because when a question like that gets asked by an early elementary age child, they obviously want to know what they can do about it, but also they want to understand, you know, the other questions that come up as a result of what we're talking about right now. And so again, the informal is what happens at that backyard patio. The formal is what happens though the next day in school, not as a knee-jerk reaction to current events, but rather to say that we know that all kids right now are immersed in an issue that's near and dear to them. It's important because it's happening in their community and it's affecting people far away as well. How do we make sure that that is meaningfully embedded in our curriculum, that kids are reading and working with different texts and unpacking the evidence? So I'll leave you with that.
Thanks. And so maybe Pramod, you can speak a little bit about how do we ensure teachers are prepared to follow up that next day? How do we ensure that teachers are prepared to teach these things?
I think the important part is basically the two things in terms of, I agree with you initially, and what we are saying is that there are a handful of very motivated and passionate teachers who have created those examples, and which is also keeping this movement going. But then we need more teachers and other stakeholders. And one of the approach that we have been using is that it's not a class approach or a subject approach, but a whole school approach. And it's a whole school mindset or a thinking, whole institution, because you cannot put that thinking in a box. You have to bring it in all the contexts that are there, kind of. And that the important part, which was also mentioned about in the wildfire, is that the connections are invisible, kind of thing, and making those connections visible to children is the biggest challenge. And for that reason, that those kind of skills are required amongst the educators who has the patience. That's what's important, to basically not rush through the knowledge part, but give the children time to reflect and think, and then follow it up. Not the next day, but maybe over 3 months or next year, because otherwise it might happen that the wildfire is not next year, but something other is there. But then how do you connect the two and keep that conversation going and that reflection going? one important element that my own experience with education is that moment you are exposed to this, and then that conversation happens, that reflection happens, you start seeing that in all the communication and discussion in all the newspaper media. Otherwise, most of us are blind to all that conversation or the context or the data that is around us, but then that becomes visible. And then the other part is which is part of all the important democratic society, and as I highlighted in the beginning, is ultimately it boils down to what I can do, and getting that space for action is an important. Otherwise, it will still remain a question and a discussion and something happening far away. No, I'm not connected to it, kind of thing. But then showing those results may be very small, but success is important, and getting that child excited about that, and a teacher who is able to excite that child into that continued journey of taking those small steps for big leaps for our society is important. And so ultimately it is all about believing in the child, giving the child some space, and helping the teacher have that those kind of environment in which he or she can work. Otherwise, we know what standardized learning, our standard curriculum, and then expectation of career and a pressure that a teacher has to follow in terms of. And for that reason, we see that we get wonderful teachers at primary level where there are lesser pressure compared to when we move to secondary, and then again then becomes a very difficult thing for a teacher when he or she is teaching at the college level, because the space for them to be a teacher greatly reduces as such.
And maybe I could give the last word to Michelle, perhaps. Is that
Sure.
okay, Tracy? Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
we'll wrap
I'll
up
take
right
it.
after that, but I want to make sure Michelle gets that chance. Yes.
Yes, because I'm sitting here thinking to these wonderfully inspiring actions and pathways for teachers and students. But I'm thinking about in contexts like the United States, where climate denialism and climate skepticism is so high and makes teaching things like climate change highly controversial. How do we go about implementing this kind of education for climate action with a civics engagement component in a space that is quite challenging, and where teachers themselves don't have the professional resilience to go against the grain many times?
Well, I think, that's an issue that, teaching controversial topics has been something that's very much been on the mind of teachers over the last 4 years, given the contentious political environment in the US, and certainly the social justice and movement that has just gotten a new life in 2020. And so I think that what I am noticing through our partners and members is that there's a lot of really, really strong work being done with curriculum and resources regarding how to have those controversial conversations, and some tips about, how can you kind of depersonalize it and really talk about it from a content standpoint, like Larry was saying, but also how can you allow for debate and conversation about the content, rather about personal views. And there's actually, I'm thinking specifically about Museum Ed. I'm sure some of you have heard about their work. They do a great workshop regarding controversial topics. I would also suggest looking at, I think there's a link that I shared with Project Look Sharp. Project Look Sharp is an organization in Ithaca, New York that does really good curriculum work, and they have a lot of toolkits around sustainability, environmental issues. So I would kind of turn to the experts there. But I think there's been a lot of really good work about that question, how do I teach controversial topics? And I think it's a really important question, because what we don't want to have happen is a continued avoidance of these really, really important topics that students need. And then I'm just going to echo what other panelists have said, is that we do need to continue to focus our education and take the lead from our students, and have real youth-centered curriculum and also youth-centered projects, and have them involved, because they have really strong ways of dealing with controversial topics, and we can actually learn quite a bit from them. So I think making sure that teachers are engaging their students in a really productive, participatory way in the classroom is really important, no matter what the topic, but certainly on something like climate change and the climate crisis, which is incredibly important to youth.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Tracy, I am so over time. I apologize. Over to you.
It's absolutely okay. It just demonstrates that there's so much to talk about. This topic is so big, it's so far reaching, and it's so critical that we act now. So thank you so much for this amazing, incredible, distinguished panel, everyone, for your thoughts. I've been trying to throw links into the chat so people can see those. We will share out an email following the event about more resources. We will also have a recording. Thank you, Christina, for facilitating this wonderful conversation. I know it's hard to manage so many thoughts and ideas because there's just so much to talk about. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your passion and your incredible work. And thank you for what you do, each of you, every day to make this world a better place. So we're so grateful for you and your time today. Everyone, please tune into our website for more information. Again, we will share this recording. Please reach out to earthday.org with any questions, and we'll try to connect you to more panelists. But thank you for your support today. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.